She had money of her own from her grandfather's estate, and Charles Averill was her guardian. Aunt Agnes sent Edith to a class to learn to make wax flowers, a fad at that time. She made a bouquet of lilies, and they were very beautiful. Some time later, Edith said to her aunt, "Auntie, I think I should make you some new flowers. These seem to be getting a little dusty." Agnes went into a rage and slapped Edith's face and said, "Don't you ever say anything in my house is dusty." Edith had been living there for 9 years, was 24 years old. At last she got angry too, and taking her aunt's wrist, she backed her up against the wall and said, "That's the last time you'll do that to me. I'm leaving." But again, the next day she packed a few clothes, took the train to Middleville to stay with Aunt Nettie until she could decide what to do next. While living in Bay City, Uncle Charles was trying to get friendly with Edith. She was terrified about being left alone in a room with him, and she managed to keep her distance from him. After she had been at Aunt Nettie's for about a week, she began to get love letters from her Uncle Charles. She never answered any of them, but kept them. Thinking of her future, she did not want to be a burden to Nettie and Nellie, so she got the idea of taking her money and getting a college education. So she wrote to the bank in Bay City to send her money that Charles had banked for her to the bank in Middleville. They replied that she had no money there, since Averill had put it all in his account. The Humphrey family had an old friend by the name of Miller. He was a judge in Hastings. Edith wrote to him of her troubles. He told her to write to her aunt and say she would be there in 3 days to get her trunk and clothes that she had left behind in her haste. He said, "Be sure to bring those letters, and I will go with you." When the train came to a small depot outside of Bay City, Agnes and Charles boarded the train to ride in with her. What a shock they got when they saw Judge Miller with her. When they reached Bay City, the judge said, "Agnes, you take Edith to your house and give her her trunk and clothes. I am going to Charles' office to talk to him." When Agnes and Edith arrived at the Averill's home, Edith was told to stay out in the yard. A maid dragged her trunk out there, and then a window upstairs was opened, and Edith's clothes were thrown out piece by piece, and she had to pack them there in the yard. Meanwhile, the judge showed Charles the letter she had written, and he said, "Now then, either Edith gets her money or Agnes gets these letters. Which shall it be?" The money was promptly sent to the Middleville Bank in her name. Edith enrolled in Olivet College. This was to be the happiest days of her life. She was there 2 years. She had many girlfriends as well as boys. She had had at least 2 offers of marriage while living with the Averills. One was from a dentist and another a student at a Christian seminary, but her aunt and uncle put a stop to their romance. A friend and a roommate at Olivet lived in Sheboygan and invited Edie, as her friends called her, to spend the summer up there. She was glad to go because she really had no home to go to. While there, she met Fred Hamel, and he fell head over heels in love with this sweet little Edie, and they were married that September 15th in 1886 at Olivet. They settled in Sheboygan, Michigan, and on May 30th of 1888, their son Clayton was born. Her family all thought that she would name a boy Thomas for her grandfather who had raised her, but she detested the name. So on the birth certificate, she just had it T. Clayton, and he never knew until he was old that he had really been named Thomas Clayton. Ruth Lorette was born July 24th, 1890. About this time, after a feed store he owned went bankrupt, he got a job with the United States Weather Bureau. The instruments were very primitive when compared with today's sophisticated ones, and he had to often go out in the middle of the night to take observations. After about 2 years, he was transferred to Chicago. Why he was transferred every 2 years, I do not know, as I was not born at that time. But he was sent next to Grand Haven, Michigan, and 10 days after they arrived there, a daughter, Catherine Helen, was born February 9th, 1893. She weighed 3.5 pounds, but was full-time and normal. Then on June 16th, 1896, another baby girl. They had expected a boy, and he was to be Russell, but it was another girl. The name for her was hard to decide, and several were tried out. June, Olive, Eunice, Winifred, Lois, Rose, Lucile, and Josephine. After 3 months, Edith said we must give her a permanent name. So she put the names on slips of paper and put them in a hat. Fred drew out Lucile. And Edith added the name Humphrey. And that is how I became Lucile Humphrey Hamel. When I was about 1 year old, we were sent to Memphis, Tennessee. I was from Grand Haven. I was a sickly child, and Memphis did me no good. The sanitation in the 90s was very poor. Where there were usually alleys in other cities, Memphis had ditches of water with green scum on top, and mosquitoes by the millions. From our house, Mother said they could see signs on houses quarantined by yellow fever. That was so dangerous. I developed dysentery, a dread bowel disease that took so many of the lives of our northern soldiers during the Civil War. We were not used to that kind of climate, so the doctor said I was in a critical state, and unless they took me north again, I would not survive. So my dad sent an appeal to Washington, and they sent us to Des Moines, Iowa. We lived there about 2 years. My first memories are there. The little girl next door, I can even remember her name, Lenore Minnis. She constantly bit me and then would run away. Our next move, I remember too. Dad would always go on ahead and find a place for us to live, and poor Edith had to pack our belongings. Furniture had to be wrapped with newspaper, wound around the legs and so forth, tags put on everything, each time we moved. Then from Des Moines, when we moved from Des Moines, she had 4 children, from 11 to 3 years old, to look after on the train, and changed the trains in Chicago on our way to Lansing. We arrived in Lansing in the evening. My father could not meet us because he was working at the time. We went to a hotel to stay for the night, but the hotel had no room for us. There was an Elks convention there, and the hotels were all full. But the clerk where we went had a big heart, and he could not turn us out. He gave us his room with just one double bed and put a cot in the hall for Clayton. We slept crossways to the bed, 3 girls and Mother, but we were too tired to care. In 1901, March 29th, Edith Jeanette Hamel was born. After moving to 3 other states, all of Fred and Edith's children were born in Michigan. After 3 or 4 years in Lansing, we were sent to Grand Rapids. I was in the 2nd grade. I was often having earache and then whooping cough. And while in Lansing, Catherine and I had diphtheria. We were very sick. And if it had not been for the newly discovered antitoxin, we probably would not have survived. While in Grand Rapids, Dad was through at the Weather Bureau. I never knew why, if he was fired or quit. He really did not like to work very much. He only liked to fish. He decided we should move to the little town of Pentwater. It was February, very cold, much snow, only one business there, and that was a canning factory, which was, of course, seasonal. Why my mother did not assert herself and insist on staying in Grand Rapids, where there would be more chance of work, I do not know. In those days, the man was the boss, and when we got there, he bought a bony old horse and a buggy so he could go into the country and sell patent medicine to the farmers. He sold Dr. Green's sarsaparilla, $1 a big bottle. It was supposed to be a tonic. He sold quite a lot of it. He was a good salesman. But he would trust so many of them, and often he never got paid at all. So we were in really bad shape. About that time, I became very ill. We were visiting over at the minister's house, Catherine and I. We used to go there and play with their little child.